Hello, dear friends in Momentum Land, and welcome to The Boost. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I'm really delighted that you're joining us, especially today. Now, if it's your first time here, just go ahead and explore. And if you need to ask a question, just remember to click the question mark box in the lower left-hand side of the chat box. But just know that the questions are visible to all the attendees. So if you wanted privacy, all you have to do to ask something anonymously is to click the hand icon. Okay, so today, in partnership with the Ruderman Family Foundation, this week begins Inclusion Week here at Momentum. Now, inclusion means different things to different people, but please, let's all be clear. It is incumbent on each and every one of us to learn individual by individual what that means. And we do that so that we might build closer, more empathetic communities, and so that we might do with our fellow, not for our fellow. Together with our experts, Shira Ruderman, Professor Michael Stein, and Tamar Davis, we're kicking off an honest conversation about disabilities and how to create truly inclusive communities. We'll also be providing closed captioning for all of this week's programming. So if you need it, just click on the link in the chat pod and follow along there. I'd like to first introduce Shira Ruderman. Shira is a professional philanthropist and a social activist. She serves as the executive director of the Ruderman Family Foundation, which is a private family foundation that invests in three primary areas of focus: advocating for and advancing the inclusion of people with disabilities throughout our society, strengthening the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community, and modeling the practice of strategic philanthropy worldwide. Now, Tamar Davis is the CEO of Gateways, Access to Jewish Education. As a person herself born with a disability and the daughter of a rabbi, she is keenly aware of the value of volunteerism and advocacy within and on behalf of our Jewish community. And Professor Michael Stein is the co-founder and executive director of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability, and he's a visiting professor at Harvard Law School since 2005. Considered one of the world's leading experts on disability law and policy, Dr. Stein participated in the drafting of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We're excited to welcome all of you here today and honored to have you. And I'd like to begin by welcoming Shira Ruderman.
Thank you. So glad to be here with all of you today. It's a true pleasure.
I honestly, I cannot express to you what a privilege it is to talk to you and to learn about you. So I'd like to begin by asking you your first question, if I may. So your foundation's values and practices are clearly very committed to the principle of inclusion. But I'd like you to share with us, why did you dedicate your life's work to this cause in particular?
Great question. I remind myself the answer every day for the last 20 years. I think that I will start by saying that the foundation is this hybrid model between an organization to a philanthropical institute and to a hybrid model between our Jewish values to our secular values, and taking the approach of how to run a nonprofit like a business, but with the soul of any good nonprofit. So it's a hard combination because to some of us it means nothing, and some of us it means everything. And this is why we decided to dedicate ourselves to a public good, which is true philanthropical world, and to dedicate our professional life, which I came from strategy and management. My husband is the president, came from politics, and we took it together and brought it to our practice. The reason we chose disability came from very simple principles. One is everyone deserves an opportunity. And we learned pretty quickly when we started the journey that in the Jewish world, not everyone has access and not really everyone has an opportunity. So we had to understand what are the barriers, why does it happen, how we take the most important values that we all come across, especially like an organization through Momentum. What are the Jewish values? What spark us? What makes us proud? And how is it that we do not practice it in our day schools, in our synagogues, in our cultural life, in our Jewish community centers? I mean, the more you think about it, you'll be shocked if you go back 20 years ago, how nothing was part of our practice in the Jewish community. And we brought this with the understanding that we need to be full of impact. So we impact oriented like you do in any business.
Right.
We have to be creative. So it's not going to be traditional just based on the charity and the chesed model, because chesed and charity, as much as it's important, it's just the beginning or the foundation of a conversation, because then you do for people all the time and you don't do it with them. You don't see them as equal. So we had to change the conversation, and we did it with two practices. We came with approach that, we're going to do what others don't do. We're going to bring services, policies, and demand internal change within the organization we choose to work. And in the same time, we'll encourage, fund, and help by expertise and support the organization to do awareness campaigns or awareness videos or writing about it. And scalability. It cannot be small, not just in your neighborhood and in your synagogue, although it's very important. It has to be bigger so the impact will be felt by each one of us.
Whoa. So what are some of your proudest achievements? I mean, for example, what has your foundation done in the Boston area as well as worldwide? Why to create more inclusive environments, specifically in the Jewish communities? How'd you do it?
It is a very tough question. It's like choosing your kids, right? Which one you like. And I know some people say, what's the connection? It is because we spend a lot of time rethinking, renegotiating, recreating, and at times actually bringing the ideas to the organization and say, we chose you. Do you think you can do it? And we will be behind you and guide you and tell you. So it's very, very hard. But yet and still, I do have some amazing opportunity. I mean, it's amazing achievements that it's hard to not mention. I mean, Tamar is with us. She's the director of Gateways. We were the founders of Gateways about, between 16 to 18 years ago, which were like a small dream come true and made, I think a tremendous mark on the American Jewish community, access to Jewish day schools. The other thing is working with all the dominations, Chabad, OU, Reform, Conservative, for so many years. Hard work getting into the organizations to make them change their mindset, change their language. I mean, I'll give you a tiny, tiny example. When a rabbi says, please stand, and you have quite a few people in your audience that cannot stand, either because of physical disability or other reasons, or elderly. I mean, someone can say, oh, what's the big deal? But it's small changes that makes a big deal. And of course, creating a guide to tefillah, to davening, creating access to davening. So you today have a rabbi with hearing impaired and he's the head of a synagogue. It's not like, wow, how can it be? It's like, of course it can be. And many more things like that. So we work with all the four dominations. I have to point out an outstanding initiative with the local federation CGP by the name RCIP, which is synagogue inclusion. We took 54 synagogues, and hopefully we'll get soon to be the 80 synagogues, to make them more inclusive in mindset, in language, in creating a committee in their synagogue, making sure that people with disability are part of the conversation of any decisions. And I'll just say a side note, it doesn't mean we're changing halakha based in places that are not comfortable. We're making
just for a moment,
the conversation.
Shira, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Just for our viewers who are not familiar with the word halakha, this means Jewish law.
And it's very complex because in some places it seems like if there's not law, we cannot accommodate. And we actually created over the years, not here in Boston, but in the state of Israel, with the chief rabbinate and all the dominations that possible in Israel, to allow them to be part of the conversation, to make sure that every change we're going to make, like a kid can have a bar mitzvah, the height of the mezuzah can be adjusted, a rabbi with disability can be a rabbi, all of it will be approved by the most conservative Jewish laws decision makers. And I have to say, the list is high. One last example, I would say, like working with Hollywood, changing the conversation on the TV screens, on the Oscar ceremonies, to make them understand that giving access and a fair opportunity, it is their power to change the conversation for generations. So there are many things. It's hard not to keep mentioning. I mean, police brutality. We all live in the United States these days. There are many challenges, issues around our, relationships with the police, which some of them are truly just missing lack of training and knowledge.
Right.
Nothing, I think, that is. So we created a white paper about police brutality and disability, and the police today across some major cities in the United States, between Boston, Chicago, New York, doing training for police. So the list is big.
Shira, I cannot imagine the impact that your vision and your passion is creating. So I'm just curious also how the foundation advocates for individuals with disabilities. And here's a really important piece to the thousands of mothers who are listening. Can you give us a few practical tips on how we as individuals, as families, can become more inclusive in our own lives? And then I'm going to also invite Tamar and Michael to join us.
Of course. First, I'll say there's no better power than mothers, than parents. In cases that, mothers are not the only parent to exist, but I truly believe in power of women. I truly believe that we have the ability to advocate in different ways that can neutralize the ego and the barriers to solutions and compromise, which compromise is not a bad word. It means that we are enabling things to happen. This is what it means. So I truly believe that us and all of us listening today, and partners, or members of Momentum, has the true power to change. If you start with a small change or a big change, it's not the key to how assess the success. It's actually, are we starting to make the changes? So a few tips of how we can make it. First of all, speak up. You see something that's missing, do not take no as an answer. We can make changes. We proved it if we look at the problem and find solutions. Number two, language creates reality. So if we adopt certain language of inclusive mindset, we will allow our actions to reflect our words. And it's important because if you tell to a kid, you can do it versus, you know what, I'm not quite sure you can do it, it makes a big difference. Third, we have to cooperate. This is not a mission that we can do alone. So it means, like, if we make our house inclusive, but the JCC is not inclusive, or the synagogue is not inclusive, or the day school, or going to a movie, or going to a restaurant, getting into a website, this is all the things we touch in the work we do. And the list is so long. We have to cooperate because we have to save time and money and make it effective. So if you look at the live stream of a person when they start in the kindergarten and they finish when they're 100 years old, this is how the process needs to be done, not like in steps. Today I'm taking care just of kindergarten, whatever happens to you when you get to age 30, I don't care. No, because once we push each other and each one of us invest in a specific age or area, we will be able to make this change. I'll close by saying that it's so hard in one moment to put everything in a snapshot, how you're being inclusive. But everything starts and ends with people. If you cooperate with people, if you believe in people, if you give opportunities and you empower each other, we will be able to make the change together. And this is why having such a conversation with amazing mothers, ladies, women's executives, and many other positions we all hold together will make the change. So thank you.
God bless you. I certainly hope you're right. I mean, there's so many tangible things that we really need to look at. And just, simply once you've just said that, would everybody please rise if you are able would be the obvious way to finish that sentence, right? And being hyper conscious of that enables us to be with people and not doing for them, as you said. So I'm grateful for that excellent introduction. And now I wanted to speak a little bit to Tamar.
Thank you for having me.
So, of course, Tamar, Judaism teaches us that every child should be educated and raised in accordance to their way. So, how would you tell the mothers of children with disabilities to properly advocate and even demand inclusion within their child's educational environment? What are the steps?
That's a big question.
I know.
And but I love it. I think it's exactly the right question. And this is right in the heart of what I'm passionate about and why I work for a place like Gateways, which Shira just mentioned. Thanks to the Ruderman family, we're even able to be here and on the scene for the last 16 years or so. And for me, again, like this question really hits home because as a person with a disability, my parents had to advocate for me. And I have a child with a disability also different from my own, and I have to advocate for my child too. So this is not just my professional work, this is deeply, deeply personal to me. And so for my parents, this was a different time, even, however many years ago this was, they were laser focused on making sure I could have a Jewish education. And for them, that really meant getting me into a Jewish day school without compromising my hearing and my speech development. I'm hearing impaired. This is my disability. And for the first few years of my life, I actually attended a special school for the deaf and hearing impaired. And in order to get me mainstreamed into Jewish education and get me into a Jewish day school, they had to advocate for me to be able to get services outside through the public school system. And that was a big deal. And that's still a big deal now. We're really not all the way there yet in so many parts of the country. And so I needed those services in order to access the Jewish day school curriculum and make sure I could actually communicate and be the person I am today. And for my own child, well, I'm in the perfect job to advocate for my child. But I wanted to pick up on something that was spoken about before about the word inclusion, because there are so many paths that a child can take to reach full inclusion into Jewish life and Jewish learning. And so that's part of where, I really think about what Gateways does in terms of how inclusion can provide a choice, right? Because how do we figure out what the paths are? What are the paths that are available to us? And so we need to create those choices. And that's really important for the community to be involved in and support. Because if we don't have all of our children as part of Jewish life and learning, then the eternality of the Jewish people are at stake. And I feel like that's really critical. And so, whether it's being in a Jewish day school and getting the services literally on site, which is part of what Gateways does, or enrolling your child in a Sunday school program or B'nai Mitzvah program, which again is something that Gateways does, so that your child get the Jewish education to be able to go back into their community and really be able to participate in their own communities, Jewish life and Jewish learning. So you can see how these mean different things and what does inclusion really mean. But I'd like to broaden the question a little bit, Adrienne, if you can allow me, for
Please.
our audience. How can we all be advocates of children with disabilities in our community, even if we don't have a family member with a disability?
Right.
And I strongly believe this is a partnership, and it's exactly how Shira was talking about, changing the conversation, creating those initiatives like the Ruderman Synagogue Inclusion Project. And to me, it's about partnerships with our community leaders in our schools, in our shuls, synagogues, in our communal spaces, and the partnership with other parents and other families who are not affected directly by having a member, someone with a disability, because we all have different challenges that we face, right? We all have different tests that are before us, and we need one another. It's like that quote from the Talmud, Shakol Yisrael Arabim Zeh B'Zeh, right? We're all responsible for one another. And so we're on a strong path to it, but again, also being mindful that, yes, maybe my synagogue is more inclusive of someone with hearing impairment because I'm here and I'm advocating for myself, but it's not really inclusive of someone who's in a wheelchair and can't get to the bima, to the center stage of the synagogue to be able to read from the Torah or something like that. So we're getting there, and it's a little bit fits to start, but this conversation is critical, and we all need to be part of aspiring to a goal of what true inclusion is really all about.
Wow. So I have a question now for you, Michael. As a professor whose expertise lies in the center of this discussion, can you give me 3 things that you would teach us right now to raise our level of understanding of this issue so we could be more fluent and understanding?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I disappeared. It wasn't voluntary. So I am a professor, but I'm also an advocate who happens to have a disability and who happens to have worked in 40-something different countries. So the first thing I would point out is that disabled people are people. Some are more charming than others. Some still have work to do in their personal development. Some are much more capable than others, and some need a helping hand. So when approaching people with disabilities, we need to approach them as people, as personalities, as individuals, not as categories or as stereotypes. Let's go in with an open heart and with an open mind and engage with the person rather than engage with what it is we might be anticipating or being concerned about. The second is that because people are people, including people with disabilities, we all have much more in common than we have that divides us. Everyone likes music, everyone likes food, everyone likes being appreciated and being loved. Let's think about what we have in common, and when approaching people with or without disabilities, try to see the divine in them, try to see the good in them, try to see the godliness in them, and try to connect with that, because that's how we come together as communities, as persons, rather than being apart. And the third is trying to see the value in every single person. Everyone has something to contribute to their communities, to their street, to their neighborhood, to their shul, to wherever. Let's try to think about how people bring value. What do they add by just by being there, not because there's some ends to a means.
Wow. So, Michael, let me ask you again, who, if anyone, are the unsung heroes, the misunderstood when it comes to parenting?
Well, I have to echo my old friend Shira on that. And that is, it's the families and the people who support, because they're 24/7, often unsung, often engaging with tensions and trauma and challenges on a daily basis where they are the bottom line. There's no other level of defense. There may be support, but they're the ones who are there, and it's their lives and they're contributing to it. And we work with parent support groups, and primarily they're women. She was right about that. Primarily they're women all over the world, Philippines, Bangladesh, China, and many of the stories are often the same, about feeling confused, about feeling isolated, lonely, angry, not knowing what to do. And when people come together, when they work together, they establish and they move change. And I tell my students, there's no greater ally in the world than an angry mother.
Yes.
Certainly, whatever it is that I've achieved, I wouldn't be here if not for my parents.
Wow. So do you think that mothers, for example, who do not have children with special disabilities or needs, have an obligation to be looking towards supporting other mothers? Is that one way that we can go beyond our tunnel vision about our own existing family by going to the caregiver as much as we would? Go ahead, Tamar, tell me what you think.
I 100% agree. I mean, if you just look at the makeup of the board of Gateways, it is not parents with disabilities only. It's made up of a variety of members. You need to have that community representation. First of all, just to have the voice in the community, it's so critical. And the more people talk together, push for an agenda and advocate together, then you really will make change. If it's just one component, one piece of the community, it's not going to affect anything. It also helps alleviate the stigma. Like, we're all in this together. And it's interesting, I was picking up on some of the language that we've been using, where people with disability, we don't talk about disabled people or handicapped people. That's old language that is really not an accepted thing. And for me, it's why, because that's a stigma. Saying I'm disabled means I'm not able to do things, right? I have a disability. That's very much a part of who I am, but it's not what defines me or necessarily should hold me back from being able to accomplish the things that I want to set out for myself and accomplish.
Can I add to that? Is it, I would say even a bit more than that. I would say that I expect people without disability to be part of this conversation for a simple reason. Many times people ask us, as an executive or as a mother, you don't have a disability, why do you care? you don't identify yourself as a person with disability, why do you think you can speak for the rights of people with disabilities? Which I have to say, at moments really, really bothers me or even hurt me, because I'm saying to myself, so if you don't identify or you don't think you have, it means you cannot stand up for human rights that should be the way we all want, which is access, accommodations, living with dignity, having opportunities. And I think one of the key that we saw changes in the work that we did, and I don't know how Michael saw that or what he thinks about it, but is when we decided two principles. Number one, we would not work with an organization that identified themselves for a single disability. They have to be across disability, because we have to be a more unified, powerful, in the big numbers of people, so people will pay more attention. We're talking about over 20% of the population of people with disability. If I have a child with a disability, I feel like it's good enough for me to be a good advocate. I don't have to have the disability itself. Number two, it will be looked upon as a social justice matter or a human rights issue if we stop looking at that just for people with disability. It's the way we want our companies, our societies, our schools, our synagogues to run. So it's not I'm doing a favor to a person with disability. I am doing it right so everyone can have access. And the last thing I would say, which this I know can be a little bit more sensitive, but a disability is not just by born. You inherit disabilities. And
Indeed.
most numbers, actually, if you learn, and Michael can maybe support it or give the more accurate data, people inherit disabilities along the age more than born with, meaning that we all going to need some kind of accommodation to some extended degree in services one day. So why not to want it from day one? Without to feel like someone did me a favor when I'm 20 after an accident, God forbid, or 50 because of age, or 80. And this is the mindset that I hope that we can introduce, that it's not a favor, it's the right thing to do.
Oh, you're so right. This really goes back to the idea of being able to do things with people, not for people as well. So, Michael, I want to ask you something. I hope this is not too personal, but you did say that you couldn't have gotten where you were without your parents behind you. So, can you give we parents who are listening some ideas about what character traits, what behaviors, what attitudes made you always feel supported?
What a wonderful question, Adrian. Knowing that there's someone there who values who you are, who appreciates you, who sees good things for you in your future. Parents look at their children and, they ask, will my child have a good life? And if they believe that they can and should have good lives, they're going to approach things very differently than if they feel defeated or pushed to the side or isolated. So our connections are always important. And when we talk about connecting to the community, human rights are big things. And you mentioned the UN work, which is wonderful, but they're also small things. It's also going next door and saying, hi, we haven't met. I'd like to introduce myself. Or it's sitting down next to the child who has autism that no one else is sitting with at the school cafeteria. Or it's connecting on any other of many, many thousands of different levels.
If I may
So
add to
can
that also, I will say that, because my parents were also tremendous, I would not be speaking here today if it weren't for my parents and their advocacy efforts. And I think part of it is tenacity, not letting go of the purpose that's in front of you. They did not know if I would be able to be mainstream education. They didn't know if I would be able to speak and to communicate with other people. And they just kept persevering and kept at it and looked at the whole goal of it. And of course the love and the communication and all of that, but it was really the tenacity. Like, I learned my advocacy from them.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Shira, Michael, and Tamar, for sharing just a bit of your time and a lot of your wisdom with us today. There's so much more to talk about. On Wednesday, we're going to be discussing from a parent's perspective. And I think that will even bring this into the more personal, but your expertise and your tenacity, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for sharing with us.